It is essential that anyone reading this book know at the outset that the author is apolitical. I was convinced in 1927 that humanity's most fundamental survival problems could never be solved by politics. 1927 was the year when a human first flew alone across an ocean in one day. This was the obvious beginning of the swift integration of all humanity, groups of whose members for all their previous millions of years on the planet Earth had been so remotely deployed from one another that they existed as separate nations with ways of life approximately unknown to one another. It was obvious that the integration would require enormous amounts of energy. It was obvious that the fossil fuels were exhaustible. It was obvious that a minority of selfish humans would organize themselves to exploit the majority's transitional dilemmas. I was convinced that within the 20th century, all of humanity on our planet would enter a period of total crisis. I could see that there was an alternative to politics and its ever more wasteful, warring, and inherently vain attempts to solve one-sidedly all humanity's basic economic and social problems. That alternative was through invention, development, and reduction to the physically working stages of mass production prototypes of each member of a complete family of intercomplementary artifacts, structurally, mechanically, chemically, metallurgically, electromagnetically, and cybernetically designed to provide so much performance per each erg of energy, pound of material, and second of time invested as to make it eminently feasible and practicable to provide a sustainable standard of living for all humanity, more advanced, pleasing, and increasingly productive than any ever experienced or dreamed of by anyone in all history. It was clear that this advanced level could be entirely sustained by the many derivatives of our daily income of sun energy. It was clear that it could be attained and maintained by artifacts that would emancipate humans from piped, wired, and metered exploitation of the many by the few. This family of artifacts, leading to such comprehensive human success, I identified as livingry, in contradistinction to politics, weaponry. I called it technologically reforming the environment instead of trying politically to reform the people. Equally important, I said about 55 years ago, 1927, to see what a penniless, unknown human individual with a dependent wife and newborn child might be able to do effectively on behalf of all humanity in realistically developing such an alternative program. Being human, I made all the mistakes there were to be made, but I learned to learn by realistic recognition of the constituent facts of the mistake making and attempted to understand what the uncovered truths were trying to teach me. In my Philadelphia archives, there are approximately 40,000 articles published during the last 60 years, which successively document my progressive completions of the whole intercomplementary family of scheduled artifacts. These livingry items include the following: tensegrity, the continuous tension, discontinuous compression structuring principle of universe, i.e. stars not touching planets, electrons not touching their atomic nuclei, introduced to planet Earth to replace the continuously compression, secondarily tensioned structuring in present world around engineering theory. Designed 1929, prototyped 1929. The Dymaxion House, the autonomous, mass-producible, air-deliverable dwelling machine weighing only 3% of its equivalent and equipped conventional counterparts, single-family dwelling. Designed 1927, modeled 1928, helicopter delivered 1954. The one-piece 250-pound bathroom, designed 1928, prototyped 1936, mass-produced in polyester fiberglass in West Germany, 1970. Synergetics, exploration and publishing of the four-dimensional geometrical coordinate system employed by Nature, See Synergetics and Synergetics 2, New York, Macmillan, 1975-1979. Discovered 1927, published 1944. Dymaxion World Map. Discovery and development of a new cartographic projection system by which humanity can view the map of the whole planet Earth as one world island and one world ocean without any visible distortion in the relative size and shape of any of the land masses and without any breaks in the continental contours. This is the undistorted map for studying world problems and displaying in their true proportion resources and other data discovered. 1933, published 1943. World Game, a grand strategy program developing the design science of solving all problems with artifacts invented by self or others which take advantage of all scientific and technological development through studies of their effects of the total world, societal, and economic affairs, as ascertainable from the Dymaxion Sky-Ocean World Map, a means of assessing the feasibility of realizing various initiatives in solving world problems, invented 1927, applied 1928. Trends and transformation charts. These depict the total history of all the metallurgical, chemical, electromagnetic, structural, and mechanical trendings to greater performance per given amounts of given materials, time, and energy. A compendium of all the scenarios of science and technologies eluding advances. Chronological chart of total history of scientific discoveries and technical inventions. Chronological chart of the mining of all metals and recirculation of the scrap of those metals. Chronological charts of all major industries' performances assessed in terms of per capita human use. These charts began in 1928, first published 1937 at Bureau of Standards, Washington, D.C. Published in 9 Chains to the Moon, 1938. Published in Fortune magazine's 10th anniversary issue, 1940. This issue of Fortune went into 3 printings and took Fortune from red to black ink status. It changed USA and World Economic Health Assessment from a tonnage criteria to one based on energy consumption. The Dymaxion Omnitransport for land, air, water, surface, and submarine travel, the first full-scale working prototype stage of which was the Dymaxion car, produced to test the crosswind ground taxiing behaviors of an omni-streamlined, ultimately to be twin-orientable jet stilts flown wingless flying device which would take off and land like an eagle or duck without any prepared landing fields, similar in principle to the 40 years later descent and takeoff multi-jet system of the Apollo moon landing craft, design 1927, prototype 1933. Geodesic domes, the unlimited size clear span structures to accommodate both humanity's converging and deploying activities. Invented 1938, prototyped 1947. Since then, over 300,000 have been produced and installed around the world, from northernmost Greenland to the exact South Pole. Over 100,000 installed in children's playgrounds. Octet Truss, the flooring or roofing structure for unlimited spanning, designed 1933, prototyped 1949. The fog gun, the pneumatic means of cleaning human body, dishes, clothing, etc. without plumbing's piped-in water supply, design 1927, prototyped 1949. Compact, odorless toilet equipment for conversion of human wastes into methane gas and fertilizer, designed 1928, proven in India, now being refined for production use. Carbon blocks inserted copper disc brakes, invented and successfully demonstrated at Phelps Dodge in 1937. Bunsen burner melted water-cooled centrifuge for processing low-grade tin ore, invented and successfully demonstrated at Phelps Dodge 1937. Hanging bookshelves and other furniture, invented 1928, prototype 1930. Modeling of all geometric developments of energetic synergetic geometry, including tensegrity models of all geometrical structures and the hierarchy of primitive structural systems, the minimum all-space-filling module, the foldable 7 unique great circle models. The tetrahelixes, discovered 1927, demonstrated 1936. Twin-hole rowing and sailing devices, invented 1938, prototyped 1954. Triangular geodesic framing of ocean sailing hulls, invented 1948, successfully demonstrated IOR. Racing sloop, IMP, 1979. Very frequently I hear or read of my artifacts adjudged by critics as being failures because I did not get them into mass production and make money with them. Such money-making as criteria of success, critics do not realize that money-making was never my goal. I learned very early and painfully that you have to decide at the outset whether you are trying to make money or to make sense, as they are mutually exclusive. I saw that nature has various categories of unique gestation lags between conception of something and its birth. In humans, conception to birth is 9 months. In electronics, it is 2 years between inventive conception and industrialized production. In aeronautics, it is 5 years between invention and operating use. In automobiles, it is 10 years between conception and mass production. In railroading, the gestation is 15 years. In big city skyscraper construction, the gestational lag is 25 years. For instance, it was 25 years between the accidental falling of a steel bar into fresh cement and the practical use of steel-reinforced concrete in major buildings. Dependent on the size and situation, the period of gestation in the single-family residences varies between 50 and 75 years. Because of these lags, the earlier I could introduce the conception model, the earlier its birth could take place. I assumed that the birth into everyday life of the living rate artifacts whose working conceptual prototypes I was producing would be governed by those respective category gestation lags. I assumed my living reinventions, progressive adoptions by society, would occur only in emergencies. I called this emergence through emergency, for all of humanity to begin to break away from its conditioned reflexes regarding living facilities, home customs and styles, allowing them to be advantaged by my living rate artifacts, would take, at minimum, a half-century to get underway. Since this was clearly a half to three-quarters of a century undertaking, I saw at the outset that I best not attempt it if I was not content to go along with nature's laws. My first publication was in 1927, a bound, mimeographed book entitled 4D, standing for Fourth Dimension. I put on the cover, 2 billion new homes will be required by humanity in the next 80 years. 5 years after I undertook the program in 1927, Fortune magazine in July 1932 featured my Dymaxion house in an article written by Archibald MacLeish on the industry missed. The mass production housing industry. They were not aware of the complexity of the development. They had not discovered the different gestation rates of industrial evolution's diverse product categories. Fortune described clearly what had happened, but Fortune's writers were completely unschooled in dealing with that which had not yet happened. My 1927 Dymaxion house had excited many into trying to make money by being the first in the mass production house industry, not knowing it would take a completely new prototype in a half-century before across-the-board evolution was ready for it. A group of prominent industrialists, led by one of my young fans, had incorporated general houses, and that was all it took to get Fortune excited. 13 years later, in 1945, Fortune again featured my scientific dwelling, the Fuller House prototype, only one of which I had produced for the United States Air Force and Beech Aircraft's Wichita, Kansas plant. Fortune and many others were sure that this was to be an immediate mass production success, and more importantly to them, a moneymaker. After Beech's production engineering department had carefully analyzed the prototype and priced out its tooling costs, they tendered a firm bid to the Fuller House Company to produce replicas of this prototype in quantities of no less than 20,000 per year at a base FOB, Wichita factory price of $1,800 minus the kitchen and laundry equipment, to be furnished by General Electric for another $400 each. But Beech's bid required that $10 million for tooling would have to be provided by others. Beech already had Wichita Bank's backing of $10 million for their post-World War II private corporate plane production. The first beach-produced Fuller House was widely publicized. Soon 36,000 unsolicited orders, many with checks attached, were received for the Fuller House. At this point, it was discovered that no distributing industry existed. The general building contractors had none of the complex tools for several in one-day deliveries of the dwelling machines. None of the building codes would permit their erection. The severest blow of all was that both the National Electricians and Plumbers organizations said they would have to be paid to take apart all the prefabricated and pre-installed wiring and plumbing and put it together again, else they would not connect the otherwise ready-to-live-in house to the town's or city's electrical lines and water mains. They held exclusively the official license to do this by long-time politically enacted laws. No banks were willing to provide mortgages to cover the sale of the Fuller houses. Fortune made the mistake of assuming that the industry missed had at last come of age, but evolution's inauguration of the livingery industry had to wait until capitalism had graduated from its for centuries held assumption that physical land property constituted capitalism itself, to the startling realization that the strictly metaphysical technological know-how had become the most profitable property as the key to exploitation of the invisible industries of chemistry, metallurgy, electromagnetics, and atomics. Reorganizing all its strategies, capitalism has now unloaded its real estate property onto the people by refusing to rent and forcing people to buy their condo or coop homes. Evolution had to wait upon the government-guaranteed 40-year mortgage financing of housing's costs to exceed humans' financial capability to acquire. Evolution had to wait until the U.S. mass production of automobiles exclusively as a money-making business had been made obsolete by the technological felicity of manufacturing by other countries' producers, thus leaving U.S. productivity to reorient itself to the necessity of rehousing all humanity in mass-produced aerospace level of technology livingery. Evolution was clearly intent on postponing the inception of the livingery service industry until humanity had graduated from its pre-20th century condition as a planet of remote nations to an integrated global society, all of which waited upon completion of a world-around network of highways, airlines, and telephones, and automobiles, and jumbo jet airplanes. All these evolutionary events requisite to the livingery industry have now taken place or are about to take place in the very near future. If the political systems do not eliminate humanity with their weapons, the half-century gestating world around livingery service industry will soon be born.